The massive satellite dishes of the Deep Space Communications Array stood like metal giants against the star-filled Chilean sky. Dr. Kim Soo-jin sat alone in the control room, her eyes burning from staring at computer screens for 12 straight hours. Most of her colleagues had gone home, but something kept her glued to her workstation. For 3 months she had been tracking strange signals from deep space. And tonight felt different. The coffee in her mug had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed. Numbers and patterns flowed across her monitors in endless streams of data. As Earth's leading expert in alien communication, she had trained her mind to spot things that others might miss. Every night, she searched through the cosmic noise, hoping to find proof that humanity was not alone in the universe. At 2:47 a.m., her breath caught in her throat. Buried beneath layers of background radiation, a pattern emerged that made her heart race. Signal was weak and broken, but it was clearly artificial. No natural phenomenon could create such organized mathematical sequences. This is impossible, she whispered to herself, double-checking the data. The signal contained prime numbers arranged in perfect order, followed by the value of pi calculated 250 decimal places. Then came the golden ratio, and after that, star charts that matched no human database. Her hand shook as she reached for the phone to call her assistant, Lee Minho. The young mathematician lived only 20 minutes away, but it felt like hours before he arrived at the facility. His hair was messy from sleep, but his eyes grew wide when he saw what Soo-jin had discovered. "Where is this coming from?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside her workstation. 47 light-years away, she replied, pointing to the star charts. "Embedded in the signal, it's a constellation Lyra, but from a system we've never seen before." For the next 6 hours, they worked together to decode the message. The mathematical introduction was just the beginning. What followed was far more complex and terrifying. The signal told a story of a species called the Kethmari, peaceful traders who had built beautiful cities among the stars. But their world was dying. The message spoke of creatures called the Devourers, beings that consumed entire planets like hungry animals. These monsters had already destroyed 3 of the 5 Kethmari worlds. The survivors hid in space stations and asteroid bases, watching helplessly as their civilization crumbled. "They're asking for help," Minho said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is a distress call." The decoded message included images that made both scientists sick to their stomachs. Beautiful crystalline cities being torn apart by writhing, organic ships, graceful alien beings fleeing in panic as their world burned. Kethmari estimated they had only weeks before complete extinction, as the sun rose over the Chilean desert. Soo-jin printed out the complete translation. Her hands trembled as she read the final lines of the message. The Kethmari had sent their plea to every star system within 50 light-years, hoping someone would hear their cry for help. Earth was probably their last hope. "We have to report this immediately," she told Minho. "The Defense Council needs to know." The flight to Geneva took 14 hours. Soo-jin carried the decoded message in a locked briefcase, her mind racing with possibilities. Humanity had only recently developed faster-than-light travel, and it had never been tested over such distances. Warfare. No knowledge of alien combat tactics. No idea what they might face in the void between stars. The emergency session of the United Earth. Defense Council convened at midnight. Admiral Park Jin-woo, a weathered veteran of Earth's last global conflict, listened in grim silence as Soo-jin presented her findings. The other council members asked dozens of questions, but the evidence was overwhelming. An alien species was crying out for help, and humanity was the only one close enough to answer. "The risks are enormous," warned General Chen Wai-ming, the council's military advisor. "We could lose everything on a mission to save people we've never met." "And if we do nothing?" asked Admiral Park. "How do we live with ourselves knowing we let an entire species die?" The debate lasted 3 hours. Some council members argued that humanity should focus on defending Earth rather than venturing into unknown dangers. Others insisted that helping the Kethmari was a moral obligation that transcended national boundaries. When the vote was finally called, the result was unanimous. Earth would respond to the distress call, not because victory was certain, but because sitting idle while innocents died was unacceptable. "Prepare the fleet," Admiral Park ordered, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would change human history forever. "We're going to war." As news of the mission spread across Earth, millions of people watched the preparations with a mixture of fear and pride. Humanity was about to take its first steps onto the galactic stage, not as conquerors or explorers, but as defenders of the innocent. The signal from the Kethmari traveled 47 years to reach Earth. Now it was time to send an answer back. The massive construction yards of Luna Station buzzed with activity as Earth's first interstellar war fleet took shape. Ships that had been designed for planetary defense were hastily modified for deep space combat. New weapons systems were installed. Armor plating was reinforced. Life support systems were upgraded for the long journey ahead. Colonel Yundahi stood on the observation deck of the battleship Indomitable, watching workers swarm over the hull like ants. As the expedition's ground commander, she had spent the past month studying every piece of intelligence about the Devourers. The alien hive mind had conquered 17 different species using the same predictable tactics, but they had never faced prey that fought back with human ferocity. "The enemy thinks like a single organism," she explained to her staff officers during a briefing in the ship's war room. "They coordinate perfectly, but they also think in patterns. When they encounter resistance, they apply overwhelming force in calculated waves. It's efficient, but it's also predictable." Captain Song Miran, the Indomitable's commanding officer, studied the tactical displays with growing excitement. "So we break their patterns, make them react to chaos instead of following their plan." "Exactly," Dahi replied. Every human military leader from Sun Tzu to Napoleon understood that the enemy's strength can become their weakness. Perfect coordination becomes a liability when you can't adapt to the unexpected. Throughout the solar system, Earth's various space agencies and military forces had contributed their best ships and crews. The fleet included everything from massive battleships to nimble destroyers, each one crewed by volunteers who understood they might never see home again. But what made the human fleet truly dangerous was not its weapons or armor, but the minds of the people who operated them. Commander Han Jamin drilled his pilots in maneuvers that would have been considered suicide by any other species. Ramming attacks, close-quarters combat in asteroid fields, it's a terrifying human concept of acceptable losses in pursuit of victory. The Kethmari refugees aboard the human ships watched these preparations with growing alarm. "Your warriors seem to have no regard for their own survival," observed Kethmari Fleet Commander Veltara through her translator. The elegant alien was tall and graceful, with crystalline skin that refracted light in beautiful patterns. "How can they fight effectively while embracing death?" Captain Song Miran smiled grimly as she watched a group of Marines practice boarding. "Procedures. We're not embracing death. We're making it our weapon. Every human soldier knows that sometimes the only way to save lives is to risk your own." The concept seemed to confuse the Kethmari, whose species had evolved on a peaceful world where cooperation was essential for survival. They conducted warfare through calculated exchanges, precise maneuvers designed to minimize casualties while achieving strategic objectives. The idea of deliberately accepting losses for tactical advantage was completely alien to them. But as the human fleet prepared for departure, observers throughout the galaxy watched with very different emotions. Most alien species knew of Earth, the infamous death world where evolution had run wild. They had heard stories of a planet where every ecosystem was a battlefield, where creatures fought constantly for survival in environments that would kill most galactic citizens within minutes. The humans were products of this harsh world. Their bodies were dense with muscle and bone, their reflexes lightning fast. Their minds adapted for split-second decisions under extreme stress. They had evolved not just intelligence, but the kind of savage determination that could stare into the void and choose to fight anyway. "Intelligence reports suggest the Devourers have never encountered resistance like this," reported Major Choi Seung-min during a weapons briefing. "They're used to prey species that value individual survival above all else. They've never faced soldiers who will die to complete their mission." The human fleet carried weapons that reflected their species' violent history, kinetic railguns that could punch through enemy armor at incredible speeds, incendiary compounds that burned hot enough to melt alien hulls, nuclear warheads that could crack asteroids in half. But the most dangerous weapon was the chaotic, human capacity for improvisation that had never been seen in galactic warfare. Dr. Kim Soo-jin, now serving as the fleet's xenolinguist, studied the tactical data with growing confidence. Communicate through quantum entanglement, she explained to the command staff. Perfect coordination, but also perfect predictability. They can't adapt quickly to new situations because their hive mind processes information too slowly. As the 3-week journey through hyperspace began, the human crews trained relentlessly. They practiced boarding actions in zero gravity, rehearsed damage control procedures, and studied the organic architecture of devourer ships. The Kethmari refugees helped where they could, but they remained deeply disturbed by human military doctrine. They speak of victory or death as if there are no other options, Veltara confided to her surviving captains. Perhaps that is why they call their world a death world, not because it kills the weak, but because it creates beings who refuse to accept defeat. Long-range sensors detected the horror awaiting them as they approached the Kethmari system. 2 worlds were already stripped bare, their surfaces scarred and lifeless. The remaining survivors huddled in orbital stations while organic nightmares circled like predators. All hands to battle stations, Admiral Park announced throughout the fleet. Today we show the galaxy what happens when Earth goes to war. Human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kethmari system, and every crew member who looked at the tactical displays felt their blood run cold. The nightmare was worse than anything they had imagined from the distress signals. Massive organic ships, each one the size of a city, swarmed around the remaining inhabited worlds like hungry parasites. The devourer vessels defied every principle of ship design that humans understood. Instead of metal hulls and geometric shapes, these craft were grown rather than built. Their surfaces pulsed with veins of bioluminescent fluid, and tentacles writhed along their flanks like the arms of enormous sea creatures. Some ships appeared to be breathing, their hulls expanding and contracting in slow, hypnotic rhythms. "Sweet Mother of God," whispered Lieutenant Park Hijin from her position at the sensor station. "They're alive. The ships are actually alive." Captain Song Moran established first contact with the Kethmari survivors, and the desperation in their voices was heartbreaking. Fleet Commander Veltara's elegant features were etched with exhaustion and grief as her image appeared on the main screen. Behind her, the bridge of her crystalline ship was filled with refugees who had lost everything. "Your arrival brings hope to our dying people," Veltara transmitted, her translator struggling with concepts that had no equivalent in her musical language. "But I fear your small fleet cannot succeed where our greater numbers have failed. We have fought these creatures for 3 years, and they adapt to every strategy we attempt." Admiral Park studied the tactical display, counting enemy ships in the hundreds. The human fleet had only 37 vessels, and many of them were converted. Civilian craft with improvised weapons. By any reasonable military calculation, they were outnumbered 10-1. "We didn't come here to fight reasonable battles," Park replied calmly. "We came here to win an impossible war." The first engagement began when a group of devourer scouts detected the human fleet and moved to investigate. The alien ships approached in perfect formation, their organic hulls gleaming with patterns of light that seemed to pulse in coordination. They moved like a school of fish, each vessel responding instantly to the movements of the others. "All ships, attack pattern Alpha," Admiral Park commanded. "Show them how Earth fights." What happened next would be remembered throughout galactic history as the moment when warfare itself evolved. Instead of the careful, calculated exchanges that characterized most space battles, the human fleet charged directly into the enemy formation with guns blazing. There was no attempt to minimize losses, no complex maneuvering to avoid damage. The humans simply aimed their ships at the enemy and opened fire. The devourers, accustomed to predictable prey that valued self-preservation above all else, were caught completely off guard. Their hive mind had conquered 17 species using the same basic strategy. but they had never faced opponents who seemed to welcome death as a tactical option. Lieutenant Commander Kim Taho piloted his destroyer Defiant directly into the mouth of a massive Devourer bioship. The organic vessel's tentacles wrapped around his hull like the arms of a giant octopus, trying to crush his ship or drag it into some kind of digestive cavity. Instead of trying to escape, Kim Tae-ho armed his nuclear self-destruct sequence. 4. Earth and the Kethmari? He transmitted to the fleet, then detonated his reactor at the moment of maximum penetration. The explosion tore through 3 enemy ships, turning them into drifting clouds of organic debris. Valterra watched the tactical display with growing amazement. "They ram enemy ships deliberately," she whispered to her surviving captains. "They used their own deaths as weapons." The battle continued for 6 hours, and the humans seemed to grow more dangerous as they took casualties. When Sergeant Obiungo's boarding party was trapped inside a Devourer ship, they didn't surrender or try to escape. Instead, they fought their way to the creature's nerve center and detonated explosive charges that paralyzed the entire vessel. The Devourers began to adapt as their hive mind processed this new form of warfare. They started keeping their distance, using long-range bioweapons instead of close combat. But the humans adapted faster, using their damaged ships as decoys while intact vessels flanked the enemy from unexpected angles. "They fight like demons," Valterra reported to her remaining fleet. "But they fight for us." Colonel Yoon-dae coordinated the ground operations with ruthless efficiency. When Devourer spores began landing on the contested worlds, human soldiers didn't fall back to defensive positions. They charged into the organic pods as they split open, engaging the emerging creatures in hand-to-hand combat with weapons that seemed primitive compared to the aliens' bio-dash technology. The Kethmari watched in horror and fascination as humans fought with a ferocity that seemed to violate every law of self-preservation. When Private Park Hae-jin was surrounded by Devourer drones, she detonated her grenades rather than be taken alive. When Major Choi Sung-min's squad ran out of ammunition, they improvised weapons from debris and alien technology. By the end of the first day, the human fleet had lost 12 ships and 3,000 lives. But they had also destroyed 47 Devourer vessels and rescued 6,000 Kethmari refugees. More importantly, they had proven that the supposedly invincible enemy could be beaten. "They're not just fighting," Valterra transmitted to her people across the system. "They're winning." Now the battle for the Kethmari system entered its second week, and both sides began to change their tactics. The Devourers, for the first time, in their conquest of 17 species, faced an enemy that seemed to grow more dangerous with each passing day. Their hive minds struggled to process the chaotic human approach to warfare, while the humans learned to exploit every weakness in the alien coordination. Colonel Yoon-dae led her ground forces on the contested moon of Kethmari Prime, where the desperate fight had turned into a deadly game of survival. The Devourer creatures were unlike anything in Earth's worst nightmares. Some looked like giant insects with razor-sharp claws and acid for blood. Others resembled walking plants that could shoot poisonous spines from their bodies. But the humans adapted to each new horror with the same brutal efficiency their species had shown for millions of years. "They're testing us," Dahi reported to Admiral Park during a brief communication window. "Every new creature they send is designed to counter our previous tactics. But they're learning too slowly." The human advantage became clear in the ruins of a Kethmari city where Sergeant Lee Jiangsu's squad had been trapped for 3 days. When their ammunition ran out, they didn't surrender or retreat. Instead, they broke into a collapsed building and used the crystalline debris as improvised weapons. Jiangsu himself killed a Devourer drone by jamming a sharp piece of alien architecture through its primary sensory organ. "Impossible," whispered Kethmari, scientist Morden, watching the battle through surveillance drones. "They fight with broken glass and metal scraps, yet they continue to advance." The most shocking moment came when a massive Devourer bioship, damaged by human railgun fire, crashed into a human defensive position. Any other species would have evacuated the area and called for reinforcements. Instead, Major Choi Sung-min organized his Marines for a boarding action. "We're going inside that thing," he announced to his troops. If it's going to be on our planet, we're going to make it regret landing here. The Marines fought their way through organic corridors that pulsed with alien life. The ship's interior was like being inside a living creature, with walls that bled when damaged and floors that tried to digest anything that touched them. But the humans pressed forward with flamethrowers and explosives burning their way through arteries and nerve clusters. Fleet Commander Veltara watched this assault with growing amazement. "They're actually winning inside the creature," she reported to her surviving captains. "These Deathworlders are fighting the bioship from within its own body." The breakthrough came when Dr. Kim Soo-jin, working with a team of Kethmari scientists, aboard the command ship, discovered how the Devourer hive mind actually functioned. The creatures communicated through quantum entanglement, allowing instant coordination across vast distances. It was the perfect system for controlling a massive swarm, but it also had a critical weakness. "They're all connected to Queen ships," she explained to Admiral Park during an emergency briefing. "Sever that connection, and the entire swarm becomes confused and disorganized. But the quantum field generators are heavily defended, and we'd need to get close enough to deploy a disruption device." "How close?" Park asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Direct contact," Soo-jin replied grimly. Someone would have. To ram the Queen ship and deploy the disruptor from inside? The plan was suicide by any reasonable military standard. The Devourer Queen ships were massive organic fortresses, each one protected by hundreds of smaller vessels. Getting close enough to deploy the quantum disruptor would require running a gauntlet of bioweapons that could melt through ship armor in seconds. Commander Han, Jamin volunteered immediately. "I'll take the Courageous and a volunteer crew. We'll get you close enough to deploy the device." "The survival probability is essentially zero," warned Morden, the Kethmari scientist. "The Queen ship has thousands of defensive systems. No ship has ever penetrated its protective barrier." Jamin smiled with the same grim determination that had carried his species through ice ages and world wars. "Then we'll have to make history." As the modified human corvette Courageous prepared for its desperate mission, the entire combined fleet watched. The Kethmari had never witnessed anything like human resolve in the face of certain death. Own species valued individual survival and made decisions based on careful calculation of risk and benefit. The concept of deliberately choosing death to achieve victory was completely foreign to them, but they were learning. Inspired by human courage, some Kethmari captains began to modify their own tactics. Instead of the elegant defensive maneuvers they had used for centuries, they started making aggressive attacks against Devourer positions. It was clumsy at first, but the aliens were adapting to the human way of war. "All ships prepare for final assault," Admiral Park announced throughout the fleet. "Today we show the galaxy what happens when you threaten the innocent." The massive Queen ship loomed ahead like a mountain of living flesh, its surface crawling with defensive weapons. Thousands of smaller Devourer vessels swarmed around it in perfect coordination, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in unison. "This is it," Han Jamin transmitted to the fleet. "If we don't make it back, tell Earth we died fighting for something bigger than ourselves." The Courageous accelerated toward the enemy formation, its crew singing an old Korean battle song. As they prepared to write the final chapter of their lives, the final battle began with a desperate charge that defied every rule of military logic. Commander Han Jamin pushed the Courageous through a wall of bioweapons fire, his ship's armor melting under the alien assault. Behind him, the entire human fleet followed in a coordinated attack that looked like organized suicide to any outside observer. The Devourer Queen ship was a nightmare made real. 10 kilometers of living flesh stretched across space, its surface covered with thousands of weapon ports that fired streams of acid and bioplasma. Smaller vessels swarmed around it like antibodies protecting a vital organ, their movements perfectly synchronized by the hive mind that controlled them all. 30 seconds to target, announced Lieutenant Park Hae-jin from the weapons console, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. The quantum disruptor was armed and ready. They had to get close enough to penetrate the Queen ship's organic hull. Admiral Park coordinated fleet assault from the bridge of the Indomitable, watching his ships die one by one as they fought to clear a path for the Courageous. The destroyer Valor rammed directly into a cluster of Devourer escorts, its captain detonating his nuclear reactor to take out 6 enemy vessels. The cruiser Defiance used its dying moments to launch every missile it carried, punching holes in the Queen ship's defensive screen. Breaking through, whispered Fleet Commander Veltara, watching from her crystalline command ship. The Kethmari leader had seen her people fight desperately for 3 years, but nothing had prepared her for the savage determination of humanity at war. Colonel Yoon Dahi led her Marines in the most dangerous mission of the battle, as the courageous closed with the Queen ship. She would have to board the alien vessel and fight her way to the nerve center where the quantum disruptor could be deployed. It was a one-way mission, and everyone knew it. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth, she told her troops as they prepared for the boarding action. We're fighting for every species that refuses to kneel before these monsters. The Courageous slammed into the Queen ship's hull with tremendous force, its reinforced prow punching through layers of organic armor. Emergency lights flickered as the ship's systems overloaded, but the vessel held together long enough for Dahi's Marines to begin their assault. The interior of the Queen ship was like stepping into the body of a living god. Corridors pulsed with veins of bioluminescent fluid, and the walls themselves seemed to breathe. Devourer drones emerged from hidden chambers, their claws and acid weapons ready to defend their queen. But the humans had come prepared for close. Combat Sergeant Lee Jongsu led the point team with a flamethrower, burning through organic barriers while his squad provided covering fire. The alien architecture tried to heal itself around them, but the humans moved too quickly, cutting deeper into the ship's vital systems with each passing minute. Disruptor is online, reported Dr. Kim Soo-jin, her hands steady as she calibrated the quantum field generator. I need 30 seconds to synchronize with the enemy's entanglement frequency. You'll have it, Dahi replied, emptying her rifle into a charging devourer that looked like a cross between a spider and a shark. Around her, human soldiers fought with desperate courage, buying time with their lives. The effect of the quantum disruptor was immediate and devastating. As the device activated, the connection between the Queen ship and its swarm was severed. Thousands of Devourer vessels suddenly found themselves cut off from the hive mind that had controlled their every action. Confusion spread through the alien fleet like a plague. Ships that had moved in perfect coordination began crashing into each other. Some vessels fired wildly in all directions, hitting their own allies. Others simply stopped moving, their crews unable to function without the constant guidance of the hive mind. It's working, Admiral Park announced to the fleet. All ships press the attack while they're confused. The Kethmari, inspired by human sacrifice, finally abandoned their careful tactics and joined the desperate assault. Veltara's flagship rammed directly into a Devourer bioship, her crystalline hull shattering as she shouted defiance in her musical language. Other Kethmari vessels followed her example, using their ships as weapons in the final moments of the battle, but the victory came at a terrible cost. The Courageous was consumed by the Queen ship's death throes, taking Colonel Dahi and her Marines with it. Half of the human fleet was destroyed or crippled, and thousands of brave souls would never see Earth again. In the aftermath, the surviving Kethmari stared at their human rescuers with a mixture of gratitude and terror. They had witnessed something that would change galactic warfare forever. They had seen what happened when evolution created not just intelligence, but the kind of savage determination that could stare into the void and choose to fight anyway. We owe you a debt that cannot be repaid, Veltara said, her translator struggling with concepts of honor and sacrifice that had no equivalent in her language. Admiral Park, standing on the bridge of his battered flagship, looked out at the debris field where so many had died. We didn't come here for payment. We came because you asked for help. Within days, the story spread across the galaxy. Earth received its first formal invitation to join the Galactic Council, not as supplicants, but as the military force that other species would call when civilization itself was threatened. Humanity had found its place among the stars.